Welcome back to another Controlpoint Information series. Today we're going to go through what is a repository. Now, as mentioned in the previous Controlpoint Information series, a repository can be effectively anything that you're looking at. It could be things like file system, edge file system for those that don't know what that is, SharePoint, Exchange, Hadoop, XML, and obviously Content Manager. Now again, there are lots of other additional connectors that are available separate to purchase, but these are just the out-of-the-box ones. So those additional connectors are things like OneDrive, Google Drive, there's other EDRMSs as well. Again, there's a raft of different connectors that can make up a repository. So when creating a repository, there's a couple of things, and we're going to focus on a network drive today, but effectively you can have single or multiple items or paths. So you could scan at, say, the top of ICTS, or you could go into certain subfolders and create a number of different network drive paths that make up a repository. So it's not always a one-to-one relationship, and again, we go through this with our clients as part of our projects and work out what's the best approach on what they're trying to achieve. When scanning a repository, there's three different options to scan. There's repository metadata. So think of your network drive, the information that you get out of your network drive, the date created, the title, those types of things. With metadata only being another option, it actually looks at internal document properties. There are properties inside documents these days, and obviously metadata only looks at those and adds that to the list. And then lastly, content. This is my favorite. A little bit more grunt to get this to work in an effective way, but it actually looks at the content of the document. So it really doesn't matter about the name of the document. I can name it Carl's Stuff as a good example, and it will still be able to find duplication and things like that. There's options to scan contents of zip files and PST files. So each organization will be a little bit different here. Some will actually want to scan just the zip file and know they have a zip file. Others will actually want to see what's in the zip files that are sitting on shared drives or on emails or on SharePoint or those types of things. There's an option for eduction. So effectively what that means is it looks for patterns. So credit cards is a good example. So it will actually look for credit card patterns inside of actual documents. So you've got to have content scanning on to do this, and for me, this is where I get excited, and this is where there's some very good value. But effectively, you can actually scan all of the contents on a shared drive, emails, SharePoint, so forth and so on, and find where credit card patterns exist. So, in Australia, it's a 16-digit number, 9 times out of 10, and it will look for that pattern, slashes, spaces, or dashes, and say that this looks like a credit card. There's lots of other options in here. You can do things like first names, last names, addresses, date of birth. It's a whole raft of out-of-the-box options. And recently, they've actually added the ability to create your own patterns. So we've talked a little bit with our clients on this around, you might have a HR pattern for employee numbers, for example. So it might be EN1234 as the pattern. You could look for all the employee number files sitting in wherever you're scanning. It could be something like project numbers. Most organizations do projects. Most of them have project patterns or numbers. Again, you could look for those high risk and high value documents in wherever you're looking, a mess full of shared drives or SharePoint or Exchange or those types of things. You can also schedule the scanning. So again, this is around, you do your initial scan, and then going forward and going, well, now I want to scan it frequently for changes. So as the business is adding and removing documents, emails, whatever it may be, Controlpoint will continue to keep up to date with what's in that repository at that point in time. The other option here is around visualization. We're going to go through this more when I do the demo shortly, but this is actually where Controlpoint can actually cluster the information based on content. Again, it's one of the dependents of having a content scan. But what it does is it finds like documents based on the content and creates a little bit of a heat map or a cluster map for it. And we'll go through that shortly. So now we're going to go through and have a look at a little bit about repositories. Again, talking about this as part of a demo. So repositories are the one we're going to go through today. Now repositories are effectively in three states, or there's three phases of repository. There's registered, and that's when it's actually first created. So when you first do your initial scan, you have a register state repository. Some of the information there is a little bit limited. Again, you don't get the analysis, which we'll go through shortly. You've got analyzed, which again is when you've actually put the analysis or the ROT set, and we'll start to talk about these terms a lot more frequently. So this is a list of multiple different repositories. Again, today we're going to focus on a file share repository. And lastly is managed. Now this is what I like to call autopilot. Effectively, once you've got to the point of going through what you'd like to achieve, you can actually put repositories in a managed state. And what that means, and it will start to glue together once we get through categories and policies, but effectively it can actually go, hey, I found a document, it's a credit card document based on the information I've got. The policy, aka the doing, and we'll go through this more, it actually says go and put it into Content Manager or dispose of it, and it will go on autopilot and it will follow that rule as it needs to go through that process. So this is what you see on a file share or effectively any repository that you come to. Most of them look very similar across the board, and this is the summary page. So the summary page does a number of things. It tells you what repository you're in, tells you how many items you've scanned and the size of effectively what you've scanned. And again, this is just a small example. It gives you a ROT analysis, and effectively what a ROT analysis means is redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. So redundant are things like a duplication, so you've got more than one copy of this information. With redundant, you can actually look at Content Manager as a source of truth and effectively make it a master. What that means is it will actually say, well, if you've already got it in Content Manager and you've got it on the shared drive, it will come up and it will be redundant because you've already got 2 copies of it effectively. Obsolete is time-based, so traditionally information, you could say that older information is sometimes less valuable than the stuff that you're working on. If you look at the life cycle of information and how frequently we touch stuff that we created 10 years ago. So this is just saying anything over 5 years that has been created or modified or changed is effectively sitting in the obsolete bucket. You've then got trivial. Now trivial are things like shortcut files, traditionally things like IT files, so just little files that are sitting through the network drive themselves. You've got potentially risk items. Now what it does is that when you're scanning using Controlpoint, it brings up a number of things. So like for example, if you've got content on, and I'll keep using that example today, it will go through and say, well, I can't open this file. Now Controlpoint opens a lot of files by default, but files keep getting created day in, day out, and Controlpoint gets updated in the next release. You've got things like password protected. A couple of clients found this quite interesting, that there was password protected documents on the network drive or even in Content Manager. Now again, you can find out there's password protected documents, then go and talk to the people who have created those documents all through by finding out in Controlpoint, and then either get them to remove the password or keep it, depending on your own internal IT policies on that. You've got this next little section here around looking at the additional items and the additional disk. So what this does is Controlpoint, once it's scanned a drive, it will actually see how your organization has grown over a period of time with files. So for example, in 2013, there was 1,000 files that were added to the repository at that point in time. Going across here, effectively what that 1,000 files meant, that it was 81 meg of space. So again, this in an organization, this will look a lot bigger, but it will actually show you how the organization has trended with growing information over the period. Controlpoint automatically breaks down all the different file types, and what we mean by file types is effectively, documents, emails, images, presentations, spreadsheets. So again, out of the box, a document could be a .doc, a .x, it could be a templated Word document, it could be rich text documents. All of those things and all those extensions roll up to be a document. Now you can go and change these, you can go and add them, you can do whatever you'd like to do in that, but out of the box it just tells you effectively what content you've got and what are the types of content you've got. Now we have one client as an example wanted to look for something specific that wasn't on this list. They could create their own little extension list and call it OneNote, for example. They went and found all the OneNote files that got accidentally backed up to their shared drive and were able to delete them. Same again, if you wanted to hone in as part of your strategy just to look at database files, where they are, what they are, you could again use Controlpoint to go and find out what they are. Moving down to the last 2 things on the summary page, there's an of interest and a potentially sensitive items. So an of interest is effectively categories, and we'll go through this again in another information session on Controlpoint coming up. But effectively you can actually give Controlpoint the ability to go and find the high risk, high value documents in your organization. There are a couple of different ways you can do that. And when scanning, effectively you can just go, well, I've found finance documents, I've found HR job descriptions, I've found financial reports. So again, based on some categories you create, and again, this will mean more when we get to that point, you've got the ability to flag that this repository or list of repositories or group of repositories are effectively finding these types of interest categories. The other one, which is again content related, and we talked about it just before, is around that eduction or pattern matching. So again, if you have this turned on, you can actually go and see that there's been a number of effectively credit cards that have been sitting in this repository, because it's gone and found those credit card patterns and said, hey, this is potentially sensitive, maybe we need to do something about it. You can see that there's bank examples here. So there's 399 bank type examples. Now that could be just BSB numbers and account numbers. Again, you can either use the out of the box pattern matching, or you can create your own from that example. So looking at duplicates, you've got two options when having a look through these. Again, duplicates allow you to say, well, I've got 2 copies of something, or 3 or 4 or 5, and you can do them in 2 different ways. One being a duplicate set, which is what we're going to go through first, and then secondly by location. So duplicate set, right here we can see that I've got 2 copies of this document. The title is slightly different, but because we're scanning content, Controlpoint says these are exactly the same document, and it does that by doing an MD5 checksum on the document, as well as a number of other algorithms to say this is the same document. Now from here I can again process these, I can go through and add tags and policies and delete, and again could get lost in doing what we can do in here. But effectively at a high level we can say these 2 are the same, and I can go and make a business decision then. Same thing if I go and have a look through these documents, these ones are named exactly the same, however they might be in a different file share path. So you can hover over it and see the location and see that, look, they are in a different actual files drive effectively. This is in Financial 2 and the other one is in Financial 4. We do find a lot of our clients effectively have multiple copies of everything, because you might send it on email, you might save it all locally because you might want to review that later on. And again, what happens is it just keeps growing and growing and growing, and effectively allows you to have multiple copies of that sitting through your network drive or wherever. The other option is by location. So by location, again, we talked about a master repository very briefly in the summary tab. But effectively you can say that your content manager or other EDRMSs effectively is a source of truth. So use that as the master. If it's in content manager, then I want to know about it. So what this is saying here is there's 137 files that are also sitting in our content manager that are also sitting somewhere out in the shared drive that we're looking at. So again, really quick analysis, really good for return on investments. Why do I need these files if they're already managed corporately sitting in our EDRMS? The other option here as well is internal. So internal just means internal to itself. Now again, we've scanned one drive here. It's saying that there's 300 duplicates internally to where we've scanned as part of this repository. The next tab along is analysis. Now, there's a raft of the different analysis that you can do, so by age, by category, by risk, by sensitive group, by size, type and user. We'll go through a couple of these just to show you what you can do. So by default we're saying age, and we're looking at the created date. So we're saying that over a period of time there's effectively between 5 to 10 years there's been nearly 4,000 files that have been created. Now that's fine, but sometimes looking at things like last accessed and last modified might mean more depending on what you're trying to do with Controlpoint, or even with your information management strategy. So looking at things when they were accessed, they might have been created 10 years ago but are accessed every year. That's probably a little bit more important of a document to you than stuff that was accessed 10 years ago that hasn't been, or created 10 years ago that hasn't been accessed in 10 years. Again, the same option here about modified. When was the last time these documents were modified? Again, will change how you look at your information once you again start to know it and understand it. And again, I can go through and click on any of these and actually bring back some information and go, right, I'm looking at the 1 to 3 year gap. Here's some files that I've started to look through, and again, start to add these through as we go. Another one of the analysis options is by category, and again, it will show that we've created some categories in advance for this, and this will mean more when we get to it. but it will see that I've got these finance accounting files, I've got HR job files sitting in this repository. So again, it's just saying there are categories that I've got that are sitting in a repository that match what I'm looking for. One of the other options you can do is size. I like this example for a couple of different reasons. One of the main ones is you might be able to target the really, really large files. So, if you're a council or even government entities these days have lots of, large AutoCAD files, video, audio, those things are getting more and more popular. You can actually then narrow down and say, well, I just want to look at why have I got 105 gig files, for example. Or I just want to look through the, 100 meg, 10 to 100 meg files. Now they could be really large PDFs, images or documents, or Excel even. Again, it just allows you to look at files in a different way based on their size. By type, again, similar to the summary page where we can look through, I just want to look through some database files. Again, just allows you to analyze this in a different way and going through and seeing that. You've also got by user. So again, this is quite handy to see what users are actually doing. Now in this example, it's our demo environment, so I'm the administrator, so I've done everything. But in a real life example, you'll see John Smith, Mary Kay, Carl Duncan, those types of things, and actually see how much they've created and effectively what they've been doing. And again, you can narrow down just on one user to find out what's happening. Tags is an option to effectively look at tagging information or files or documents with different metadata. So if I just go back to the example we had before around duplicates, you can actually get the business to go through and effectively select documents that they want to keep or remove, select an option here to tag, and then you've got a raft of different options about what you'd like to do with this document. Now again, I can say I want to remove it, and I'm going to pick a reason that it's it's redundant for me. I've got an option to add a comment if I'd like to because it's a duplicate. Now what's happening here is, you can actually get the business to actually tag their own information once you've given them a bit of a repository and said this is your information, ICTS, corporate services, finance, so forth and so on. And then say now, as an owner of this information, tell me as a records keeper or an information manager, tell me what you want to do with it. And as they go through and apply these certain tags and go through the process, what actually happens is it applies tags to that information. I've removed a document, this one's obsolete. And in the tag section, I can actually roll this up and see that this information's been tagged. I can see there's now 2 of them sitting here. I can actually go through and look at some properties of this information and actually see who applied the tag, when they applied the tag, and then be able to actually go, right, the administrator, which is me, or Fred Smith, or so forth and so on, have said that we can get rid of this. And effectively this is like defensible disposition. There's always I get involved and the team does as well. A lot of rigor around disposing in an ERMS. In a shared drive, a user can hit delete and no one really cares. When we start to implement Controlpoint, there's a lot more rigor around disposal and making sure there's enough checks and balances. Just by using the product, you can effectively know who said what they wanted to get rid of or keep, and then as an information manager, I can action it accordingly. Remove, I'm going to delete it using Controlpoint, or I'm going to move it into Content Manager or to another drive, wherever. And again, we'll actually go through and tell you you've got governance, you've got that, I suppose that wrapping around that risk of actually going through and hitting the big red delete button. The Contents tab effectively allows you to navigate down the file tree of content. So at the moment I'm at the top level, but if I start to click down and go through the process, I can actually see that I can navigate my whole drive and go, okay, I'm at the file share level. I'm now going down into a folder called Brad. As most users do, we create folders for ourselves. I'm going to go into CD, and effectively what that means is I can go down and actually look at just a folder by itself. Now there's also a concept called subsets. Won't go into large amount of detail about that, but you might just want to have this whole summary, duplicates, analysis and tags just about Brad's folder. And again, multiple ways you can do that. We like to talk through with all of our customers just to see how they want to do that and if there's a need. And again, most times we can either suggest creating subsets or creating another repository itself. The visualization tab, again, This is where we've actually looked at some information. We're scanning content to actually have visualization happen. We've had some people say this looks like a little bit of a petri dish for those back in the high school science days. And effectively what it's doing is it's scanning the content, and based on the content it's giving us a bit of a heat map and says all these documents, for example, are about crisis. So again, the titles could be different, the content of it all has I suppose a common theme or a concept, and it's all about crisis. So going through this, we can see that there's actually little snippets of the document as well, and we can see here that the word crisis or those types of things are mentioned a number of different times. Again, this might be financial statements. I've had others around Telstra billing as an example. So again, I can actually then select these documents and do whatever I want to do for them. I can apply policies or action these accordingly. So that's it for today. I just wanted to go through again a bit of a summary of what we've gone through. We've just gone through what a repository is. We've gone through the various sections on the screen, on the summary page, and gone through the relevant tags. Again, this is just a little bit of a sneak peek of effectively what Controlpoint repositories can do. And again, SharePoint repositories, file shares, content manager, and Exchange, they'll all be different looks and feels, but very similar themes and concepts around it. There'll be some more of those coming up in some other Controlpoint Information series to date. Thanks for watching.